All right. Hello again, and welcome to another book review series here that I'm going to be doing. This time I am on my sci-fi fantasy books. So, thanks for watching, and let me get into the actual books I'm going to cover today. There are three books. One is the Nth Metal from the Comet Cycle. Next one is the Coward, book one of the Quest for Heroes, and the last one is the Jasmin Throne, book one of the Burning Kingdoms. So these are all three book ones of a series. So let me tell you what I think about all of them, but first, check out my new intro. Alrighty, I am back. So, hopefully you like that. I thought it was pretty cool. But let me talk about the first book here. Is the Ninth Metal, the Comet Cycle Book 1. This is by Benjamin Percy. I know Benjamin Percy from a bunch of comic books. This is actually my first book from Benjamin Percy. And let me read what this says. Hold on, let me pull the actual description. Okay. It began with a comet. At first, people gazed in wonder at the radiant tear in the sky. A year later, the celestial marvel became a planetary crisis, where Earth spun through the comet's debris field and the sky rained fire. Wait a minute. Okay. Okay. The town of North Fall, Minnesota will never be the same. Meteors created hardwood forests and annihilated homes, and among the wreckage, a new metal was discovered. This omni metal has properties that make it world-changing as an energy source and a weapon. John Frontier, the troubled scion of an iron ore dynasty in Northfall, returns for his sister's wedding, to find his family embroiled in a cutthroat war to control mineral rights and mining operations. His father rightly suspects foreign leaders and competition corporations of sabotage, but the greatest threat to his legacy might be the U.S. government. Physicist Victoria Lennon was recruited by the Department of Defense to research omni-metal, but she finds herself trapped in the laboratory of nightmares. And across town, a rookie cop is investigating a murder that puts her own life in the crosshairs. She will have to compromise her moral code to bring justice to this now lawless community. In this gut punch of a novel, the first in his comet cycle, Ben Percy lays bare how a modern-day gold rush has turned the middle of nowhere into the center of everything, and how one family, the Frontiers, hope to control it all. So what did I think of the Ninth Metal? In general, I thought it was an okay book. I wasn't crazy about it. There are things about it that's interesting. I mean, the concept of this comet. This comet doesn't just create this omni-metal. What it is basically this comet, goes over the whole Earth. Meteorites crash down into different places. This place, I believe it's in Minnesota, actually is becomes a high concentration of basically what they call raining metal, and a lot of different options with this new omni metal. And the concept of the omni metal is it's a metal that basically has its own power source. So it's a metal that can be powered as well as an energy source and a metal. So they talk about how the trains now run on omni metal, that the tracks are made from this omni metal, and then they don't have to actually worry about any kind of power source. So obviously, this Omni metal is very, very sought after. It creates a huge gold rush in this town, kind of builds a small little town into a huge gold rush town, which causes a lot of problems, causes a lot of corruption, causes a lot of different things. Um, there is a religious group that worships the metal. They call them the metal eaters. I'm not sure if they actually eat the metal or not, but that's what they call them. They call them the metal eaters. And what happens is a lot of people want that land because that land has obviously a lot of omni metal in it. So there are the big corporations from different countries. There are a lot of different, wealthy kind of large conglomerate that's trying to get that metal. And then there's this frontier family that also wants the metal. And that comes in with this guy named Jonathan, who was away from the family for a while. He comes back for this wedding, like you read, and he actually works to try to work with this religious group to get that land. The person who is the leader of this religious group, called Mother, says that the only way you're going to be able to actually get that land is if you give me back my son. She believes that her son is in the Department of Defense being held. Now, there's a person named Victoria, who's a scientist, who you read about as well. She's also kind of experimenting on her son. You find out a little bit more. It kind of does have a little bit of a superhero angle to it a little bit, as far as how the son has kind of powers as well. So that's also being trained and learned from Victoria. She's trying to actually see this kid, what kind of power he has. Of course, the government wants to use him for a weapon or something of that nature. And she has kind of misgivings about it. And again, there's also the story about the Stacy, who is the police presence as well, who has to kind of compromise stuff. Like I said, I like the story. I didn't think it was bad. I don't know if it I mean, it definitely would be classified in the science fiction area, kind of, but it's not as science fictiony as I would like. It's not really fantasy. Again, it's more of it's a nice setup for like a superhero type of thing, and I feel like the other titles in the series will actually deal with other parts of the world and how this comet affects them. So I'm not sure if these characters that we saw in the Ninth Metal are going to be in the other stories. So I kind of am interested in how that comet affects all the other people, but I'm not really crazy about this first book. I mean, I feel like it's an okay book. If you like the story that I told you about, if you're interested in it, it's not a bad book, but it's really nothing that really grabbed me. It's like I said, it's basically a 3-star book, and out of the 3 books I've actually read here, it's my weakest one. So that's my review of The Ninth Metal by Benjamin Percy. So let me talk about another book that I actually liked a lot more. Was The Coward, which is book 1 of The Quest for Heroes. I really like this book. This is a story basically about... Well, let me read what it says here. It's easier to actually read the synopsis to give you an idea. Kel Crescia is a legend, a celebrity, a hero. Aged just 17, he set out on an epic quest with a band of wizard fighters to slay the Ice Lich and save the world, but only he returned victorious. The Lich was dead, the ice receded, and the 5 kingdoms were safe. 10 years have passed. Kel lives in a quiet farmer's life, while stories about his heroism are told in every tavern across the length and breadth of the land. But now a new terror has arisen in the north. Beyond the Frozen Circle, north of the Frostrunner clans, something has taken up residence in the Lice's abandoned castle, and the ice is beginning to creep south once more. For a second time, Kel is called upon to take up his famous sword, Slayer, and battle the forces of darkness. But he has a terrible secret that nobody knows. He's not a hero. He was just lucky. Everyone put their faith in Kel the Legend, but he is a coward who has no intention of risking his life for anyone. One thing I'm gonna read here about this is this has, in my mind, one of the best first lines I have read in, especially in a fantasy novel, in a very long time. So I just wanted to read the first line of this book. Um, okay, let's see. Kyle Kesser. Where was it? Oh, Kyle Kesser, Slayer of the Ice Lynch and Savior of the Five Kingdoms, tripped on a rake and fell into a pile of horse shit. That's the first line of this book. I think it gives you a good idea of how this book goes. This book takes all of the myths and kind of like just kind of destroys the kind of myth of how being, or even makes fun of in a way, the myth of being this big, easy quest that you go on and you fight all these monsters and you beat the villain. And it kind of talks about how Kel Crusher just was lucky. He was lucky about winning this battle. I don't like the title of the coward because when reading the story, I don't see him as a coward. I mean, he basically decides, okay, well, I know that this is tough. I know that just having, the will to fight and being strong is not enough. I need all these other people around me. I need a lot more men, a lot more money around me. I need a lot more resources around me in order to fight this. So he knows the challenge because he went in it the first time lucky. He went in it when he was young and idealistic. So when he finds out that the ice is actually threatening his land again, threatening his livelihood, he steps up and he actually goes to the king. The king, actually the king tells him to come to him, and the king tells him that he wants him to go and actually fight this ice lich again, see what's going on in the castle, see if it's back or not, and he takes the charge. He actually says, okay, I'm gonna do this, but I want all of these extra restrictions. The problem is all the stories are made up. All the stories are very mythical and almost heroic, and he knows a lot of these stories weren't heroic. A lot of these stories were scary and desperate and difficult. So he got to go through with all of these different characters that he has, that he meets. I love all the characters that are in it, especially Garen, who is basically kind of like another version of himself, who's a 17-year-old person who actually connects himself to the quest of heroes here, and he actually says, okay, I want to join you. And of course Kel, of course Kel tries to discourage him, but he knows that he was discouraged too, and he still went. So this Garen comes in. Garen finds out that Kel is not what he expected him to be. He's not the hero that he heard from all the stories. That he's a phony kind of, and he still comes, he still goes, and they still actually bond as a group. And there's a whole bunch of different people I want to talk about. There's the Bard, who is Vali is the Bard, the person who writes the story, who in his own right, him and Garen have a very good relationship there. Somewhat. I wouldn't say romantic as much, but there is definitely romantic tensions there. Alpha, who is kind of the aloof kind of I won't say alien, but basically the person who's trying to understand humanity, I guess, understanding these different heroes and what motivates them and how they interact. So kind of like I guess like the Vulcan of the group. This weird, off-putting. Alien, no, not alien, but this weird off-putting character. That's what Alfar is. I'm probably just drawing these names. Bronin is a female warrior, like a Xena type of character, or a Red Sonja type of character, really strong character. Then there's Malamir, who is the boasting man who's he's a beast slayer and human slayer, and he says he killed all these different beasts, and you find out that he does exaggerate a little bit of his story as well. Then there's also Vital, who I think this is how I'm saying this. Vital is the high priestess. There is a sub story here about the religious group, which I think is going to play way more into the second book than this first book. But the religious group do not like Kyle Kessler. I can't say that name. Do not like Kel Crescia because he supports people who believe in superstitions. They believe in all these monsters and all these beasts that he slayed, and they want people to follow their religion. They don't believe in these different supernatural elements. They think that those elements take away from their religion. So they don't like Kel Kessia, and they don't want to see him really succeed. And this person kind of schemes and machinates behind the scenes, and really doesn't really want him to succeed. And that does play into the story later on. But what you find out with this adventure that they make is they fight these battles, and not everybody makes it out alive. I'll tell you, God honest truth, not all of these characters make it out alive. But it's a challenge. The animals that they have to fight, the different challenges they have to fight are really interesting. And I was just really enjoying the way the story went. And when they finally got to the ice lish, and so what's going on, you still never really find out like how this ice lish is how the ice lish got back. What happened. You find out a lot more about the first time that he fought it, which was I think 10 years before, and you find out a lot more about that story. And of course, you see this story, him dealing with these other groups, and then when he comes back, there's another little wrinkle that happens. The king that actually sends him out. What happens to him? What happens to everything else that goes on into his world when he comes back? A whole big change happens, and it makes me really look forward to the second book in this series. And I'm definitely going to give this. I would almost give this a 5-star, but I'm still going to give it a 4 because I think that in some ways it's a little simplistic, and I would like a little bit more of multi layers in the story. I feel like it's just a little simple of okay. Here it is. I meet the king. I assemble my men, and I basically go to location to location, kill, deal with hardship, get to the end, fight the big bad, and that's basically kind of how the story goes. Not a lot of variation in it, except for this little side plot with the religion, which it just seems to be like hinted at here. What's going to happen? We don't really know yet. Like I said, the way this story ended, I definitely look forward to the second book. But I just wish it would have had a little bit more depth. And speaking of depth, I'll get to the next book, which is the Jasmin Throne. Now, this story is, again, part 1 of the Burning Kingdom. So let me read what they say here, what this story is about. Okay. Exiled by her despotic brother, Princess Malini spends her days dreaming of vengeance while imprisoned in Hirana, an ancient cliffside temple that was once the revered source of magical, deathless waters, but now is little more than a decaying ruin. The secrets of the Hirana call to Priya, but in order to keep the truth of her past safely hidden, she works as a servant in the loathed regent's household, biting her tongue and cleaning Malini's chambers. But when Malini witnesses Priya's true nature, the designs become irrevocably tangled. One is a ruthless princess seeking to steal a throne. The other is a powerful priestess seeking to save her family. Together they will set an empire ablaze. Okay, I did enjoy this story. I liked it. It had way more depth than the other stories, as far as like a lot of world building in this story, in the Jasmin Throne. And let me just pull it up here to the top. That's the bottom. Yeah, it had a lot more depth in the Jasmin Throne than the Coward, and I did like that. It was nice to see Priya. If you get introduced to Priya and you find out about a little bit about the world, you find out about the rot. The rot is basically this plague that goes through this kingdom that her and the princess are in. That affects the poor people more than the wealthier people, because the wealthy people can afford the sacred wood that kind of wards off and kind of slows down the decay of the rot. And because this sacred wood is really hard to cultivate in the sacred woods, they basically make it into beads that people wear. It's very hard to suppress the rot. The rot is kind of like, it basically, I don't say turns people plants. It reminds me of kind of like a swamp thing. It kind of makes people turn green and little plants start to grow around them. And it's basically affecting this one kingdom, which is what the name of this kingdom is. The Aharana kingdom, which is basically a conquered kingdom. I think of it as kind of like maybe like a second class kind of people. You know, what do you want to think of it as Palestinian? You want to think of it as South African or something like that in this world. But it's basically a kingdom that has been kind of subjugated, kind of ruled by this evil emperor, which is this woman who was exiled. This Malini, her brother, takes over the throne when the original emperor dies, and he's just as bad. And he, basically, takes Melina, puts her in this kingdom, this poor kingdom kind of thing, and this is where Priya meets her. Her and Melina work together then, because what happens is obviously Melina finds out about Priya, because Priya has powers, and we find out is a lot of these people in the arena, I'm saying these wrong, Aharana. One of these people in the Aharana province, they have powers when they connect with the Deathless Waters. Now, the Deathless Waters are only in this temple of Harana, that Priya and Malini are in. And that temple, that water, the Deathless Waters are hidden. So the only people who were able to actually access the Deathless Waters were temple children. And you find out that all the temple children were killed at a young age in the temple, except for Priya. So Priya is the only one who actually has access to the Deathless Waters. She's basically able to get access to those waters. And when you have access to those waters, and you partake in those waters, you get powers. Okay? So Priya has, can access those waters to get powers, and people want access to those waters, especially the leader of the rebels of this country, of this Harana. So one of the leaders of this country happens to be Priya's brother, who is what's his name, Ashok, I guess his name is, and he actually tries to get access to them, and he's a major player in this story, as well as Bhumika, who is the wife of the regent of this area. She basically is kind of like a person to try to make the peace kind of thing, because she's from Arana, and she marries this royal from the emperor's kingdom to try to harmonize the different that land and the general empire. But she has her own agenda as well, obviously, to try to help Harana. And they were all kind of competing, and they were all kind of, manipulating. It's all basically politics played between all of the different factions. And it was really good. It just felt like the story kind of dragged a little bit sometimes. And that was probably one of the problems with it. The story did drag. There is a romance between Priya and Malini that people talk about, a female romance between these two. It's there. It's not as prevalent as I guess people would think it would be based on everyone talking about it. It's also, to me, it's not well developed. I didn't really like the development of it. It just didn't feel like it was earned to me. Kind of like, it was barely there. Maybe a couple little mentions, and boom, it just kind of like, oh, here comes a kiss, and it's like, well, wait a minute. It just felt like it was a little too forced. It didn't feel like they really had time to really grow and develop this romance, and that was a problem with me. But I really liked the whole concept of the Deathless Waters, of the Rot, of the Sacred Woods, of all the different kind of factions that are going on. And I will read the next book in this series. I do really want to read the next book, but I do think it did step a little bit down. It could have been a better book if it just would have been able to kind of focus in on all the different characters. There's a bunch of characters here I didn't even mention. That they could have focused a little bit better on these characters and would have made them a little bit more enjoyable. But for me, that's my review of the Jasmine Throne. I thought it was good, but it could have had a little bit more improvement if it would have been written a little bit differently, as far as, like, I guess, a little bit fleshed out for some of those secondary characters. I would have liked, instead of just focusing mainly on Malini and Priya. And those are my review of these 3 books. Again, if you stayed to the end, thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.